Welcome to the Times of Israel's Friday Focus. I'm your host, Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our diplomatic correspondent, Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for joining me in our Jerusalem office.
Great to be here, as always.
Shana Tova, or what should we be saying now? Moedim l'simcha, something like that?
No, certainly not. Certainly not. Gmar Chatima Tova.
Oh, are we already at that stage of Gmar Chatima Tova? May you be written in the book of life, that stage?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Okay.
That's more or less the translation. We're wishing ourselves to be, sealed in the coming days for a good year, the book of life, and all the other blessings that we may be praying for.
And we're going to say that to each other until after Yom Kippur, essentially?
Yes.
All right. So, Gmar Chatima Tova, Lazar.
You too.
All right. So let's begin our podcast, though that did definitely sound like an ending. And it's been quite a week. Of course, we had Rosh Hashanah right in the middle of the week, but just before Rosh Hashanah, on Sunday, the tally of the 193 UN members who recognize a state of Palestine moved up to at least 145 as the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Portugal formally joined their ranks. Several other countries, including France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Malta, followed suit during a summit on the future of the two-state solution that was chaired by France and Saudi Arabia on Monday at the United Nations headquarters in New York. So we are going to discuss whether this is at all significant after the break. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our diplomatic correspondent, Lazar Berman. So this week is the United Nations General Assembly, and there are a lot of speeches, including from U.S. President Donald Trump, who really, really condemned, it appeared to me, this recognition of a Palestinian state. I'm just going to quote a little bit from his speech. Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for those horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much. This could have been solved so long ago, but instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now. Lazar, this is a very strong, obvious condemnation of recognizing a state of Palestine. Who do you think that Trump was specifically addressing in his remarks?
First of all, you should have done that in a Trump voice. That would be a wonderful opportunity to get your imitation out there. But it was France, I think, is the leader of this effort. They're the ones. President Emmanuel Macron is the one who made the announcement. France and Saudi Arabia chaired this conference earlier in the week. But of course, other close American and Israeli allies, the UK and Canada, also went along with this. So I think it's mainly focused on them. There's the smaller group of countries, San Marino, Malta, Andorra. I don't think he's thinking about those too much. It's the countries with which Trump and the U.S. have a lot of dealings and a lot of coordination, including on the Middle East, including on the Gaza issue. And I think there is where he's expressing his frustrations.
Right. And in fact, I believe that this is the first time that a G7 country has recognized the state of Palestine. That's Britain and Canada. And do you think that it is the more significant because of the stature of these countries?
Oh, for sure. I mean, when it comes to, there's like different groups of countries. So if the Arab and Muslim countries, it's kind of, okay, of course, they're going to recognize the state of Palestine. There's the European countries that were part of the Soviet Union that kind of, or in the Warsaw Pact that kind of had to, but they did it under the Soviet Union. So let's say Hungary, which obviously wouldn't recognize them right now, but they already did recognize them because they were under Soviet domination. And then you have, much of the third world that does. So the Israel would always take solace in the fact that there's this kind of moral majority of Western democracies that did not recognize a Palestinian state. So that was virtually all of Western Europe, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, South Korea. And that's Israel was saying, great, all these other countries that don't share our values do, but the countries that share our values don't recognize a Palestinian state. That obviously has been torn apart by this French-led initiative. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why it's so significant.
Right. And it's not only the US, obviously, who is upset over this recognition, rather also Israel. So what exactly are Israel's concerns here?
So there's a couple of them. The first one is what Trump was alluding to, is what effect this will have on Hamas in two fields. One is popular support for Hamas, or Hamas's ability to say, look, I was right. I said that we need to do something drastic for the Palestinian cause. We did something drastic. Hamas is paying the price. We're losing our fighters. We lost our leaders. And look, the Palestinian people have gained something. So this is this idea that October 7th will be the date most identified with Palestinian independence. I think there's a serious claim to be made for that. So that's number one. Number two is, given that there is an attempt to somehow force Hamas to give up, to raise its hands, give up its arms, and realize that it has lost this Gaza war, release the hostages, and go into exile. This is something that I think gives them a lot of reason to believe that the longer they hold out, the worse it'll get for Israel. And eventually, Israel will either crack under international pressure or will be forced somehow to end the war without, and get the hostages back, but without succeeding in breaking Hamas, meaning Hamas in the future can rebuild, reconstitute, rearm at some point as well. So I think that is very serious as well. We know Hamas has been very sensitive to pressure on Israel, and whether it's domestic, whether it's international, and that gives it hope that it just needs to hold out and things will get worse for Israel and better for it. And I think that there couldn't be anything right now that gives it more hope than countries that don't like Hamas, that are allies of Israel, saying to Israel, stop the war now, get the hostages out, obviously. We're going to recognize a Palestinian state, but no matter what, Israel has to stop the war. And this campaign, putting out these pictures of kids that are allegedly starving because there's not food going in, but it turns out they have all sorts of pre-existing conditions, clearly leading to this. And so this starvation campaign has definitely worked and has definitely brought achievements to the Palestinian cause, and also, it seems, is giving Hamas reason to believe that it has more breathing room than it might have on the ground.
And they're not being subtle about this. And in fact, after the UK and Canada recognized the State of Palestine, a senior Hamas official, Mahmoud Mardani, tied the recognition of the state to the terror group's invasion and massacre in Israel on October 7, 2023, saying, quote, "It came thanks to the immense sacrifices made by Palestinians since the Hamas attacks, especially those in Gaza." So there's no subtlety here. Hamas, at least, is doing the 1 + 1 = 2. But why are the states such as Britain, such as France, really being adamant that this is not a prize for Hamas?
They say that Hamas doesn't believe in a two-state solution, and they're doing this in order to revive or push forward the two-state solution. And therefore, how could Hamas like this? They're also saying that they say very clearly that Hamas cannot have any part in this future state. And some of them are even conditioning the full opening of diplomatic ties on Hamas either disarming or letting go of hostages. So they say this is an anti-Hamas gesture, and that it is strengthening the quote-unquote moderates, the Palestinian Authority. I think that there's a amount of naivete there, or wishful thinking, that, let's say even if a Palestinian state was actually established on the ground, just because you say Hamas can't have a part of it, Hamas isn't just going to disappear. And obviously, if a Palestinian state was actually established today and Israel was not, the IDF was not inside of that state, Hamas would take over very quickly, as they did in Gaza. And then the question is, okay, so what? You just created a Hamas state. Does that state, do they pull the recognition? Probably not. But now you have a state with the rights of a state on Israel's borders, very close to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, even in Jerusalem. And I don't think anyone would think that eventuality would make for a more peaceful future. It would just mean a war, but this time in the West Bank as well.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our diplomatic correspondent, Lazar Berman. So the United Nations offers a stage for all sorts of different nations to spread their message. And of course, Palestinian Authority President Abbas also used this stage remotely because he was not able to get a visa to enter the US. And during his allotted time, he denounced the Israeli quote unquote genocide in Gaza, but at the same time rejected what Hamas did on October 7th. It wasn't the first time that Abbas has rejected it, but he did it in perhaps more detail this time than he has any other. And do you think this is also because there's such scrutiny on the Palestinian issue this particular week at the UN?
Yeah, I'm sure that's part of it. He wrote that letter to Macron where he condemned October 7th and promised to make reforms, and that really had an impact on Macron's decision. Now, I'm sure that Abbas knows that there's not going to be a Palestinian state. He's not going to be the president of any Palestinian state, but he understands that there's positive momentum for him now. There could be positive momentum for his organization as well. He understands that he does need to do a series of reforms. We'll see how far they go. And that could actually be good for Israel. You know, if Israel wanted to be constructive about this, it could actually say, before we talk about any sort of state or any two-state process, first we need to see A, B, C, and D and make sure that they're not giving money to terrorists and their textbooks, which are absolutely awful, change, and a number of other things as well, and that they stop this lawfare campaign in international arenas. But that also brings me to the second reason why Israel would be so concerned about this, that as a state or as an entity that or international organizations recognize as a state, they have much more access to international treaties, which means they can push Israel for action in international treaties, right? So if they join, let's say, international airspace treaty, that means that Israel would have to respect their airspace as they would any other country, and therefore they could ask for measures to be taken about Israel if Israel violates their airspace. Obviously, Israel is going to control everything that happens over the West Bank. So this opens up a wave of possibilities. Now, this was opened up already when Palestine was given non-member observer status at the UN. That's one of the reasons why the International Criminal Court says that they have standing to go after, to adjudicate what is happening in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and to actually issue arrest warrants for former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So there is absolutely implications in international fora of being recognized as a Palestinian state. I say there is obviously no state, right? International law says there is a state or there isn't. So here we have this weird, intermediate thing. There's clearly not a full state. Under the 1933 Montevideo Convention, there's 4 parameters for a state actually having being recognized as a state. It needs a permanent population, which is stable. It's not really clear that it really has that, because much of its population is in areas under Israeli control, let's say Area C. Defined territory, it certainly does not have defined territory. A lot of countries don't have fully. Israel doesn't have fully defined territory, but it doesn't in any way have defined territory. Does it have government that can, enact laws and control the population of the territory? No. Much of what happens, either Israel does or it needs Israel's approval. And the capacity to enter into foreign relations with other states, yeah, it basically has that. It can open up embassies and whatnot. So it really does not meet those standards, and everyone knows it doesn't meet those standards. But that's not really the point of this week's wave of recognitions.
It's really interesting what you're saying. And of course, the only other, let's call it autonomy, that has this UN non-member recognition is the Vatican. And does the Vatican meet all of those criteria?
I'd say it does. I mean, the Vatican territory is well-defined, small, but it's well-defined. It has the ability to enter into relations with other states. It controls its tiny population. Yeah, and it enforces laws. So I think the Vatican certainly has more claim to being a state. But it's somewhat different, whether it's a UN observer or member state versus whether countries recognize it. It's not 100%, exactly the same criteria. But I would say that, yeah, the Vatican is more of a state right now than than Palestine.
Okay, so the actual recognition has some teeth in terms of the diplomatic stage, it sounds like to me from what you're saying. But in the tachlis, as we like to say here in Israel, in the very practical terms, the day-to-day life between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, does this recognition change anything in your estimation?
So it depends what everyone does with it, right? So it depends what these Western countries, how they treat it, and whether they want to continue, whether they want to use this to take more measures against Israel. I don't think they expect Israel to recognize a Palestinian state tomorrow, but they would like to see movement on some sort of process, which is very unlikely to happen. But it probably means that they are going to take further action against Israel. And you've even seen that in the EU, where the EU has started to talk about or pushing for suspending trade relationships and the like. So you'll probably see things like that. This is probably the start of even more sanctions against Israel. In terms of what happens next on the ground, Israel has a lot of control over that as well, what Israel decides to do. And that still hasn't been decided. As we speak, Prime Minister Netanyahu is in New York for his UN speech, and then we'll go to Washington, where I'll join him at the White House. That he will speak to President Trump about what Israel can do, what Israel should do next. And obviously, one of the things that Netanyahu is being pushed to do is to annex part of the West Bank. It wouldn't be parts where Palestinians live. Israel's not trying to get more Palestinians under its control, but it would be, let's say, the Jordan Valley, which is almost exclusively Israeli. There are some small Palestinian villages. So they'll want to coordinate on that. There's a range of other things that Israel could do as well. It could punish those countries. It could, let's say, close the French consulate here in Jerusalem across the street from us. It can really cut them out of any sort of diplomacy between Israel and the Palestinians. Or it could move territories that were, let's say, Area A under full Palestinian security and civil control to Area B, where Israel has security control, or from Area B to Area C, where Israel has full civil and security control. So that there's a number of options there. Certainly the UAE and the Saudis have made it very clear that they would not accept any annexation, and that would invite further measures. But the big point here is that what happens next depends on the decisions of the states, especially Israel as well, and much less so the Palestinian Authority.
All right, Lazar, I thank you so much. This is a slightly briefer Friday Focus because we're recording a little early. It's not Friday, and you're having a fast day. So I see you're fading fast.
Fading quickly. I have like an hour and a half then I get to eat, but hopefully this was interesting and coherent.
It was definitely interesting and as coherent as ever. Badonch. So, Lazar, thank you so much. And as we said at the beginning, Gmar Chatima Tova.
Gmar Chatima Tova, and I hope you and all of our listeners have a wonderful, safe, and healthy year.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this week's Friday Focus. Please check out another installment next week. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next week, Shalom.